What up, dudes? It's Gaz, and welcome to the WARFRAME video. So, we just had a really short live stream with a pretty upsetting and disappointing topic. We were talking about the new Prime Access, and, we'll go over that pretty soon. But today we're going to be going over the thing that is probably the most important about this new update, and that's going to be the Riven Disposition Pass that came out, which means the Rivens that already exist got their stats changed for better or for worse. And I'm going to go ahead and tell you right now, basically everything got buffed here. There's like one actual nerf and then two or three like slap in the face nerfs that aren't going to really mean much in the long run of things. So before we get into it, before we get into all this information, I'm going to give you some in-depth explanations on I think things will actually matter when these buffs, hit or not. Make sure you're solid sub to the channel and all that kind of stuff, following the live stream channel, all that. If you want to keep up to date on all these videos, we do 5 videos a week on this channel, all Warframe related, unless there's like some Destiny thing or some other game thing I want to upload. So, let's go over what we got here. I'm going to show you some stuff that got buffed, some stuff that got nerfed, and we can just talk about it. Alright, so let's get into it. This is the dev post from the person that posts these. I don't know if this guy specifically picks these numbers, but he does post the actual information on the forums. So, he is the face of Riven buffs and nerfs as far as I'm aware, so it's most likely not just him that makes these changes. But let's read their explanation behind what is going on here. Alright, so greetings Tenno. Gara Prime Access has arrived to shatter your expectations. And I'll tell you what, my expectations were shattered for sure. And with it comes another set of Riven disposition changes. Similar to last time, we have refrained from any gun reductions. And only a couple melee weapons are still in need. He used the word need of downward adjustments. So they did not nerf any guns, is what that means to you, the Riven mods for the guns, and they needed to nerf some of the melee ones. For what reason, I'm not sure. He did not really go into much detail on why they needed. There was a need. It was required to nerf them. It's not like there's any actual content that matters, any raid bosses, any like raid mechanics, any important content that was requiring these weapons to have their stats reduced on their Riven mods. It wasn't. We'll get into it, okay? Most of you know the process by now. Let's dive in. Thanks for reading. So the only thing they got nerfed is a couple melee, so we'll just go over all these buffs and the primaries and secondaries first, okay? And I'm going to go into a little more detail than I probably should, because, we like to talk a lot on this channel. Alright, the first weapon, the Boo Boo Nico, the infested arm cannon that comes from your clan dojo, and is actually a very strong weapon, to be honest. This thing received a Riven buff from 0.6 to 0.7, so that is actually a pretty decent size buff. The smallest kind of buff you're going to see is like this one on the catch screen right here, from 1 to 1.05. That 0.5 increase there, you'll see like a small increase on your stats for your Rivens, but for the most part, that's not really a huge increase, and you're not going to see like a sizable increase in weapon performance from these kind of small buffs. But the Boo Boo Nico got a from 0.6 to 0.7. My Riven personally, it went up about 20% or 10 to 20% multi-shot, and it does feel much stronger now. You can spam the alt fire. You're seeing more explosions if you have a multi-shot Riven, a crit chance Riven, since the crit chance mods for this thing is a shotgun. Technically, shotguns actually have really weak crit mods. So yeah, I've got 89%, 83% crit chance and a 99% multi-shot increase on here. I know it's not a great Riven, but as you can see right here, the crit multiplier on the secondary shot is actually 3.5, so if you've somehow got some crit chance from Avenger or something like that, it would be pretty good. And the multi-shot's very high. We're shooting 22 pellets per shot here. This thing actually, so here's the thing. With all these gun buffs, you might be like, well, guns kind of suck in this game, dude. They, on the Steel Path, they're trash. Melee is the only way to go. And you're right, but if they ever add, here's my prediction. I'm expecting them to add a dev workshop on what they're doing for gun buffs in the near future. And that means that they're going to show what they're going to be doing to either nerf melee, buff guns, or a little bit of both. And as you can see, this thing, its alt fire has very high status chance. It's got built-in viral, I believe. And then the primary shot has high crit. So it's like you prime them with the secondary shot, you kill them with the primary shot. Secondary, then primary. And if they ever add condition overload for primaries, you could look at this thing potentially being an extremely powerful weapon. It already is. This is a negative damage to Grenier Riven. Those were Grenier, and it was still destroying them. So, the Boo Boo Nico, it got a pretty decent buff, and if they do some gun buffs, expect that one to be a monster, guys. We got the next one, Catch Moon Primary. Like I said, this is not going to make a huge sizable difference, and the Catch Moon Primary has no headshot multiplier, so you're not going to see a huge increase in power here. But, you know, you might like it. This thing uses shotgun mods as well, and I've never found it really exciting. I'd say it's one of the worst primary kit guns, but you might like it. The CDO actually went from 0.55 to 0.6, so this is also, it's one of those small buffs. You're not going to really notice too much here, guys. I'd say most CDO Riven should have multi-shot as one of their main stats, and this tiny little buff is not going to push you over any thresholds where it's like, well, now it's so much better now. As you can see, like, we've got 72% multi-shot and 92% damage, and on the one with 2 stats in a negative, we get 83% multi-shot. I mean, I guess that kind of stacks nicely with Hell's Chamber, where it's going to have 83% with 2 stats in a negative, but it's honestly not too big of a deal, and I'm not really like thinking this is going to be like making the CDO 10 times better than it was. It's just a very, very small buff, just to say that they did buff something that you're not going to notice in the long run. Going a little bit faster here, the Exorgist went from 1.05 to 1.1. Now, even though this is a small buff, you probably will notice it a lot more because the Exorgist has very high base damage. And a lot of times people go for damage multi-shot elemental rolls on the Exorgist. You will probably see like over 100,000 damage easily. You already were seeing it, but you'll see even more damage with this Exorgist Riven buff. So that's really nice. Yeah, really good stuff. The Gaze Primary, it is basically a AoE laser. If you've ever played Destiny 2, it's like the Prometheus lens. A really small buff as well. I mean, this is not going to be really changing anything too much. It's a okay weapon, but nothing game-breaking. The Lanka is basically an old Eidolon weapon that no one really uses anymore because it can't kill the Eidolon while it's still in the water. You got a Riven buff, a small one, like the other small ones. It's not going to change anything. The Lanka is still not used, and it's still extremely high damage per shot, but yeah, it's basically a relic at this point. Good for the Lanka. Panthera Prime. Now, this thing was a complete meme when it came out, and it's still like nothing too phenomenal, but this crit chance buff right here, or rather this Riven Disposition buff right here, actually does help out the secondary shot if you do have a crit chance Riven on the Panthera Prime. As I believe before, if you had a crit chance Riven with 3 stats and a negative, you would not actually have enough crit chance to get over 100% crit chance on the secondary shot. But now that it's been buffed, with a crit chance Riven and point strike, we're actually at 107% crit chance on the secondary shot, which is pretty good for Hunter Munition / procs. The primary shot's still only 74% with this much crit chance. We'll just, these are just some random like smucks that I've spawned in here. Alright, so as you can see, I mean, like, it's not phenomenal, but, you know, it's good enough for a primary, I guess. The Panthera Prime, I still think is a pretty underwhelming weapon, but it does look cool. It reminds me of Dead Space a lot. So, you know, that's just a consistency buff. You'll see some orange crits now with the secondary shot if you have a crit chance Riven. Alright, moving on to the Proboscis Cernos. I'm never going to say it right, guys. I'm sorry. Small buff there. It was actually the lowest stats possible. 0.5 is the lowest stats possible. Whenever a new weapon comes out, it will have 0.5 Riven Disposition off the bat. And it's gotten buffed to 0.55. So a tiny little buff, and it was already the lowest stats possible before. It's fine, honestly. Most people are going to be going for multi-shot on this anyway, and it's not going to really push you over any thresholds. I have a multi-shot Riven for the Cernos as well I can just show you. And it's fine. It's a really good weapon that does not need a Riven at all. It is just a consistency thing. So with my Riven, which is 2 stats and a negative, I've got 63% 60% multi-shot. So it's basically just better than Vigilante armaments all around now. Besides, like, if you didn't need heat for some reason. But like I said, it's not really pushing you to any levels you didn't have before. So we got 90% here. If you stack the 60 and 60 here, it's like 3.1. It was already at 3 before, so it's really not changing much here, guys. You might potentially see, like, quad tentacles when you would never see that before, but I don't think it's important enough, personally. I mean, this thing doesn't even need a Riven in the first place if you just stack multi-shot correctly, so you might like it. Maybe you have, like, a damage multi-shot roll. You'll see a good chunk of extra damage there. I'm going to say it's not too important, but it's going to be varying person to person, depending what your Riven is. All right, we're going to do rapid fire on some of these because I'm wasting too much time. The Quelor from 1.05 to 1.1. This thing scales really well with the new internal bleeding mod, and it already hit over 100% crit chance before with a crit chance Riven, so this is just even more crit chance if you have a crit chance Riven or more crit damage, multi-shot, etc., etc. So nice for the Quelor. Still has a couple problems, really long reload speed, really bad fire rate, but if you have a fire rate Riven, there you go, it's even faster now. Now, the Rattleguts Primary, I think this one's actually pretty good. This was one of the potentially best assault rifles in the game, competing with the Kuva Karak. And it actually got buffed. This thing is really good with hunter munitions, and if this thing, like I said, if they ever add condition overload for primaries, expect this to be one of the best, if not the best, assault rifle in the game. The Kuva Karak is really good, though. That can also have an additional element. So, good for the Ralgut's primary. I do appreciate that one, and I think it's a sizable enough buff that you will notice some stuff there. I don't think it's really going to be like a huge DPS increase, though, until we actually get some changes to primaries, potentially making them where you're going to be wanting to consider using a single target assault rifle versus something like a Brahma. It's basically Brahma or bust a lot of times for these primaries, which is why I'm hoping we're getting something in the future where it's feeling more impactful. So with a crit chance Riven, we're at 129% crit chance. It was like that before. It was like that before the buff, so it's nothing to write home about. All right, the Rubico normal. I don't even care about who uses the Rubico normal. The Rubico primes that you care about, they did not get nerfed, and the Rubico normal got buffed. So there you go. Spoiler primer. I still haven't tried this out yet. Apparently, it uses shotgun mods, and it's like a Tsar kind of. It got a pretty sizable buff. I don't think it will be that important anyway, so I'm not worried about it. Now, here's where I have a bit of an issue with this change. The Sporothrix. If you don't remember what the Sporothrix was, I'm going to remind you right now. It is a 1% crit chance sniper rifle that is similar to the Zakti. It fires off a projectile. The projectile embeds in the target and will explode after a little bit of time. But did you hear what I said there? 1% crit chance. I don't care how high these stats of these Rivens are. This thing is never going to be an island hunting weapon. And what are you using a sniper rifle for in the first place after that? This weapon needs an entire rework. We need like a weapon overpass to make this thing more viable, because 1% crit chance is a meme. You can force it to crit with like the Adarza and Harrow and all that, but yeah, you're basically just going for increased base damage here, increased multi-shot. This thing has terrible reload too. I think it's like, 2.7 reload. It's got some problems for sure. It can kill high-level enemies, I suppose, but imagine if it actually had good crit. Like if this thing had like 10% crit, there you go. It would be a 10 times better weapon probably in that situation. So yeah, this is not saving the weapon. It's hilarious. They buffed it a lot. They did buff it a lot. It went from 0.85 to 1.1. Basically, as big of a buff that they're going to give one of these things, and it's still not going to matter, guys. So, unfortunate there. This weapon is just trash all around. Then we've got the Stalta going from 0.8 to 0.85. A strong weapon already, getting a Riven buff. Sure, I'll take it. Tiburon and Tiburon Prime getting a Riven increase. Now, keep in mind, the Tiburon Prime one is really tiny, as is the normal Tiburon buff. But, the Tiburon Prime was one of my favorite primaries back in the day, and it's getting a buff. A very good hunter munitions weapon, but it is single target, which is holding it back quite a bit. The Tombfinger Primary getting a Riven buff. Now, this thing already is really strong, to be honest, and getting a nice little buff there is going to give you more crit chance, more multi-shot. Shouldn't really be too big of an issue, or too big of a buff, but overall, like, more Riven stats is better if you have a Riven. The Trumna getting a tiny, tiny little buff. Shouldn't push it over any thresholds. It already had a good amount of crit chance, a good amount of crit damage, all that stuff. But, buffs are buffs. Now, the Vermisplicer Primary, keep in mind, there will probably be the Corpus Liches coming out here in the next month. And the Vermisplicer Primary is actually really good at dealing with Corpus, as it has built-in Toxin, and it actually is like a infested Amprex, will chain enemies and all that. Really, really strong. We do have videos of that on the channel. Expect this to be one of the top-tier Corpus-clearing primaries, along with the Brahma, if they don't nerf the Brahma or anything like that, or also the Ogress. So really good stuff there. Overall, these are all good changes, but here's one big problem. Where's the Tenora Prime? The Tenora Prime came out with Octavia Prime, and it still got 0.5 dispo Rivens. It is super underwhelming. What did they forget that existed? They must have forgot that the Tenora Prime existed, because as you can see right here, this is a maxed out Riven. We have 25% fire rate, 42% electric, and 71% crit chance. If they were to buff the crit chance, or if they're to buff the Riven dispo, we would actually have 100% crit chance in the primary shot, and then like almost probably 150% crit chance on the secondary shot. I feel like they forgot the Tenora Prime existed, guys, because they even buffed the Pandero Prime. So that's unfortunate. I'd like an explanation maybe on what happened there, because it just seemed like it was, like, why would they not buff it? What was so good about the Tenora Prime that they didn't have to buff it? Moving on to the secondary guns, we've got the entire Ak Bolto family getting a buff here. Now, this is, honestly, I don't even care about this. If they ever buff puncture procs to be useful, then this will matter. If puncture procs become useful, maybe through the gun buff update we'll hopefully get soon, these weapons are mostly puncture focused, and they'll proc a lot of puncture. So look out for things like this. Potentially, this could be like a future, maybe a speculation pick. Get an Ak Bolto Riven maybe. If they ever buff Puncture, that thing will be pretty nasty, but it'll still be single target, which is the problem. The Atomos, basically the weapon that you use before you get the Kuva Nukor, gets a Riven buff. It's unfortunate. The Kuva Nukor destroys this thing all day long, and this Riven buff, this tiny little Riven buff, is doing nothing to make the Atomos viable versus the Kuva Nukor. This thing should have gotten a bigger buff, in my opinion, like to like 1.0 or 1.05, something like that, and it still would not, it wouldn't even be in the same club. It would be like cleaning the toilet at the club the Kuva Nukor is hanging out at. That's what the Atomos is, okay? And we got the Catabalist. Now this thing actually, it got a huge buff. I mean, it's really, like, if you've watched the channel before, you know that I like the Catabalist. But it is a single target weapon for sure. It is a single target weapon, but it's really, really good at killing one target. Let's just quickly show it here in the simulacrum. Now, I could put some heat on this build as well, but my Riven is going to be crit damage and status chance with Minus Infested. As you can see with a crit damage Riven, 9.1 multiplier without not even a maxed out prime target cracker. So this thing, it's really good. I mean, let's just do let's do this build with. No, but we'll do it with a Riven. So, with no heat on here, we got Viral and Corrosive, 146% status chance and 9.1 crit multiplier. The enemies are just going to we have the crit cat buff, so this is not even fair. But, yeah, that. 65, they added commas to damage numbers today, by the way. So, if we had heat on here, it would be stacking up heat procs instantly. It does not normally orange crit like that, but that's just. And then once you, like, reload it, you fire off a grenade. So as you can see, like, it is potentially really strong. It does not normally crit this much, but it is a very, very powerful single target weapon with built-in, I believe, corrosive. So you can do viral and corrosive, which not a lot of other weapons can do that. And yeah, they buffed it a lot. It actually got buffed from 0.8 to 1.0, which is nearly a max power buff. And, you know, there you go. If you want a single target weapon for killing some Greniers, there you go. You found a Prime getting a small buff. Now that shotguns... multi-shot math is different. This is not going to matter at all. Some more crit chance, I guess, but really, shotgun multi-shot math has ruined the secondary fire on this thing. Now, here's why I was confused about the Tenora Prime not getting buffed. The Pandero Prime got a huge buff from 0.5 to 0.75. Good for you if you have a Pandero Riven that you bought when the Pandero Prime came out, but it really just shines a light on how the Tenora did not get buffed when it probably should have. I'll see the Pandero Prime is hitting any thresholds here. I don't have a crit chance Riven for the Pandero Prime, but if you had a Pandero Prime Riven with crit chance, you would definitely be over 100% crit chance now. So good for you if you have one of those. I have crit damage on here. We've got 7.3 multiplier. So yeah, pretty good stuff there. And with this build, it's hitting like, it's got 4,200. I was hitting like over 100,000 damage on Corpus headshots earlier using this thing after I saw the Riven buff. So a nice buff for the Pandero Prime if you want to use a single target weapon. Rail got secondary, one of the best secondaries in the game, getting a small Riven buff. It didn't really need a Riven buff, but, you know, it's good to have that. Sepulchrum, a very clunky feeling weapon that hits really hard. It actually got a big Riven buff as well. I still feel like I'm just, like, lugging around like a anvil every time I use this weapon, and it feels like it's rusty. So I don't really use it that much, but it does hit very hard. And if you like the Sepulchrum, you are okay with, like, killing a bunch of enemies, so you use the secondary rocket launcher. Good for you. You have more damage now. You have more multi-shot, you have more crit chance, and this thing maybe eventually will hit red crits with the secondary shot. I don't know. Staticore, a tiny little minuscule buff. Doesn't matter, actually, but the Staticore does have huge AoE with that new Prime Fulmination mod, or new enough Prime Fulmination mod. The Velox, this signature weapon of Protea, it's a generic assault rifle pistol. It's got a small Riven buff. Not going to really matter too much, although my fire rate Riven will fire even faster now. Vermisplicer secondary, basically Kuva Nukor nerf backup number 5. It's not very good, but it got a big Riven buff, so good for that. The Zocti Prime, Kuva Nukor backup number 3, got a decent sized Riven buff, probably almost as good as the normal Zocti Rivens now. This thing still has the problem of the delayed explosions, just ruining it and making you have to wait too long for your condition overload procs, but still good enough. The Zymos, now we're gonna show the Zymos, okay? I made a video on the Zymos like last year with Zaku and Snare, and yeah, I've learned a couple things about the Zymos since then. By the way, it got a huge Riven buff, or a pretty big Riven buff. Did you know that when you fire this thing, crit mods apply twice to the explosion? Well, now you know. With a nearly god roll Riven like this, we'll have to actually get the Adars. I'm going to show you guys. This is the stuff, okay? I'm going to show you the power. And let's just go to Zaku, actually, because I want to show you it at its max power. The Zymos is really strong, but the problem is that it is a very unwieldy weapon. And if you're not using like cheese methods like the Avenger and the Adarza Kavat, you're not going to see the absolute unleashed fury of these Zymos. So, these guys are level 180 Exo Goose Drag Officers, the tankiest non-cheese enemies that can spawn in here. Alright, so let's just go ahead and ensnare them. And let's get one Brahma shot in here. Or, not Brahma, Zymos. So as you can see, the crit mods apply twice to the explosion and the bees. So, yeah. I could have totally removed their armor if I felt like it there, but, you know, it was unnecessary. So, yeah, the Zymos got a big buff, so enjoy it if you are a Zymos cheeser, like some of us are. And overall, these are pretty good. I'm sure there was some weapon they forgot to buff that they should have buffed, but whatever. There's still the problem of a lot of these are just single-target weapons that have no real place in the game at the current speed it's played. Alright, we're getting some actual nerfs here. But I'll tell you right now, the Archititron did not get nerfed. The Archititron got buffed. And as I showed in a previous video, this thing can get like million damage slash procs easily. So if you have a minus impact Riven, you can make it a nearly purely slash weapon. Or actually, if you don't have an element on it, you will have a purely slash weapon. So this is going to make the Volnus Prime look like a little baby. So yeah, there you go. If you're disappointed with the Volnus Prime like I am, just get a minus impact Riven for the Archititron, and it is the slash weapon of your dreams. If you have electric on it like me, that's unfortunate, but yeah. It already could get minus 100% impact, but now it can get even more minus 100% impact. So good for you, people that use this, and it is really good. Check out the video on the channel if you want to see more information on that. We've got the Aram Spinoza. This is probably one of the worst weapons in the entire game. I actually deleted my Riven for it on accident, and I don't even care. It got a big Riven buff, and, you know, it still has like 9% crit chance, so yeah. Atarax, who remembers that exists. If you have an Atarax Riven some reason, it's gotten a small buff. And go you. The Dual Kamas Prime got a small Riven buff as well. The Dual Kamas Prime are already really good, so there you go. If you have a Dual Kamas Prime Riven, it's even better now. It's still lower stats than Nami Scala Prime. It does have much higher stat Rivens than Nami Scala Prime, though. They're definitely more comparable now if you are using a Riven on the Dual Kamas Prime. Which I think the Nami Scala Prime would probably come across ahead in the end, but still. Galatine Prime getting a Riven buff. That's hilarious. I haven't used this thing in so long, but there you go. Glaive Prime. I think this is I consider this the only actual real nerf in this whole Dispo pass. It went from 1.05 to 0.9. Now, and that is actually very particular, the number they picked there. I thought they were going to go whole hog on nerfing this thing, because they usually nerf it down like by 0.25 at the highest. They went from 1.05 to 0.9, so not a max value nerf, but almost max value. And I can breathe easy. My Riven did not get nerfed enough that I lose my initial combo multiplier. It's at 21 initial combo. So my Riven is actually still really good for at least 3 more months, because I do these Riven passes like every 3 months. So yeah, I'm really happy about that. I would recommend to you, if you have an initial combo Riven that is not high enough to keep your initial combo, you either try to get a negative or try to sell it, because it's only going to get nerfed. It's never going to go up from here. It will always just get nerfed. So, yeah. But if you were like me with this exact kind of Riven, you can breathe easy for another 3 months, or just try to sell it even harder for another 3 months. So, yeah. This is the only weapon that got nerfed. I mean, it is extremely, disgustingly powerful. I don't think it needed to get nerfed like they said in their quotations. Need to get nerfed. I don't think it needed to get nerfed, but I understand why it did. There's no content that actually matters, so why even nerf it in the first place, but whatever. The rest of these other 3 nerfs, the Gram Prime nerf from 0.8 to 0.75, the Cronin Prime from 0.7 to 0.65, and the Reaper Prime from 0.75 to 0.7. I don't even understand why they had to do these. It's not like people are going to stop using Rivens for these weapons just because they got a tiny little nerf. It just feels like a slap in the face for no reason at all. These weapons have extremely high base stats, which is why we're using Rivens for them and making them so strong. And they're still going to be strong even if they didn't. If you removed every Riven in the game for the Gram Prime, the Cronin Prime, and the Reaper Prime, they would still be top tier weapons. I just don't understand why you have to like insult the players like that, just nerfing them for no reason. Just put them at 0.5 if you're. At least we can stop talking about it then. I really don't appreciate these changes. I don't even use Rivens for these weapons anymore, so it's questionable at best why they're doing this. The Guandao Prime and the Guandao got a small Riven buff, and that's good because the Guandao Prime is a very good weapon and, more range in your range Riven. Halakar Wraith, did you even know that existed? Well, a lot of people didn't, and it got a Riven buff from 0.5 to 0.75. It's still worse than the Path Assist, worse than most of the glaives, as the Force proc on the Halakar Wraith is a impact proc, which is, not extremely useful. I'd say use the Path Assist over this most times. Alright, Heliocore, seeing that Heliocore, I actually forgot those exist, and they got a small Riven buff, just to remind you that they do exist. Jack-a-Tag, also getting a small Riven buff, not super impactful. No pun intended. The Keratinos, now that's the Infested Claws, the unique heavy attack, they got a Riven buff as well. Those things are very, very odd, but the heavy attack build is pretty good, and they're just like interesting weapons all around with, like, I think they have Impact, Puncture, Slash, and Viral. So you can get Corrosive, Viral, Heat, and then it has Impact, Puncture, and Slash as well. So very interesting weapons, getting a Riven buff. If you have a heavy attack build, it's probably a little bit better now. Karudo, these things can hit like over 1 million damage with a heavy attack. They got a small Riven buff. The Lecta and the Secure Lecta will never be useful ever again, so they got a Riven buff as well. I don't know why. The Mios, that's the Impact, Puncture, Slash, Blade and Whip. It's still going to be worse than Jack Kusar and the Seti Lacera, but it got a small Riven buff as well. It could get lots of slash procs, I guess, so that's something. The Nakana and the Ultha, which is a Zaw and a Nakana, those got small Riven buffs. These are just in here so you can talk about the weapon that I've never talked about the normal Nakana ever. I've never talked about the Ultha. I guess the Ultha is a good Zaw for, like, Mark for Death rapiers for Ash, if you're still going to be considering that, so there you go. Pulmonars, never actually talked about those on the channel. They're like the Infested Nunchucks. They have, like, only impact and viral, I believe, and they're not super powerful, but they got a Riven buff, a pretty big Riven buff at that. Still nothing great. The Quasis, now this is a very underrated weapon. It's a heavy attack weapon, which is basically a slash redeemer. We've had, I think, multiple videos on the channel about it, because it used to be bugged, and then it was unbugged. I think it's actually bugged again right now, but this thing hits really hard as slash procs when you do a heavy attack. So really strong stuff there, and it did get a buff. So I think the reason it got buffed is because it's not very popular, but it's very strong. And the last three we got here, the Sidon, the Vacor Sidon, I forgot those exist again, and the Vitrica, the Glassmaker Great Sword, got a pretty big Riven buff, from 0.7 to 0.85. Really good stuff there. And then we got the Arcwing Guns, who actually cares, Corriger got a buff, Corvus got a buff, Prismadula Kyrion got a big buff, and then the Morga got a decent sized buff as well. So overall, I say the biggest winners out of all this stuff, the Archititron got a buff, which is hilarious. For the melees, the Dual Commas Prime is still creeping up there. I don't think it's the best dual sword still, but it's creeping up there. And then the me specifically with the Glaive Prime, my Riven is still good, so I feel like a winner on that end. And the Quasis got a buff, which is nice, and the Guandao Prime. So honestly, not a lot of losers in the melee department. I feel like these Rivens for the Reaper, the Cronin, and the Graham will still be really good. I don't even know why they had to nerf them. It's just stupid. They need to do like some overall weapon changes here. And as far as winners on the secondary department, really I don't want to call a single target weapon a winner, but I guess a Zymos. Zymos is a winner here, as it gets a big Riven buff from 0.95 to 1.05. Got like 200% damage on mine, like a bunch of multi-shot, pretty juicy. And the rest of the stuff, I mean, Cabalist's got a big buff, but like I said, it's single target. And for winners in the primary, I think the Bubonico, Nico, really big winner here. Potentially, look, if they ever have condition over for primaries, guys, this is going to be one of the top contenders for sure. As well as a Cedo. If you could double stack condition overload on the Cedo, think of how destructive that would be. And then the rest of the stuff, I mean, a Proboscis Cernos buff is kind of nice, but I don't think it's a big enough buff to really matter. And the Sporothrix is a big loser because it just needs an entire rework. Toonmaker primary and Vermisplicer primary, both really good, and both got Riven buffs, so that's awesome. Alright guys, that is the end of this nearly 30-minute video talking about the Riven disposition buffs with Gara Prime Access. Now I really hope that the Volnus maybe even gets a buff, because I am not happy about those stats, honestly. It kind of ruined my day how low those stats on those weapons are, the new ones, and I'm really hoping that maybe they potentially rework some stuff there, so... In the meantime, I'm just going to use this Zymos on these enemies in the Simulacrum, and I hope that you guys have a nice night. I'll see you tomorrow in a video, and yeah, don't forget that, you might want to use a Zymos crit build, because who knows what will happen. Alright guys, take it easy. Peace.